This is ABC.
Just ahead on Eyewitness News, unbelievable as it may sound, someone has been found alive under the rubble of a collapsed highway in Oakland.
We'll also have the latest on the earthquake cleanup, a cleanup project that could top $1 billion.
And Clevelanders returning from San Francisco tell their stories about the big quake. It's all coming up next.
First in Ohio, TV5. Live from Ohio's News Channel, this is TV5 Eyewitness News with Ted Henry, Wilma Smith, Don Webster with the weather, Sports Director Nev Chandler, and the Eyewitness News team. Brought to you by the Illuminating Company.
Under a concrete sandwich of death, it looks like a survivor may have been found.
Incredible as it sounds, somebody we have been told has been found alive amid the rubble of the double-decker highway in Oakland that collapsed as a killer earthquake shook Northern California.
Good evening. When you think of tons of concrete crashing down on your car, it is really very difficult to imagine that anyone could survive that.
And for that very reason, Wilma, many people in Oakland had been saying that possibly 200 to 300 people could have died when a 1-mile stretch of Interstate 880 collapsed during the height of the rush hour yesterday.
But tonight there is new hope. There's optimism now that someone, it seems, has been found alive. We have more on this miraculous rescue effort. Reporter Dave Andrews joins us live now via News Star Prime from the site of the highway collapse in Oakland. Dave, how and when was this survivor found?
Wilma, right at the top, I'm sorry to tell you that I'm going to have to contradict what you have said, because just within the last couple of minutes, there has been a development here at the command center. The Oakland Police Department has just told reporters here that, in fact, the person that a surviving victim that they talked about 2 hours ago, in fact, there is no surviving victim. They just returned here a few minutes ago to say for the last hour and 45 minutes, they searched the area where they believed they heard some noises coming from a live victim underneath the debris, but they said they have used infrared cameras and have searched thoroughly, and there is no evidence whatsoever of anyone living underneath the debris of this collapsed structure of the highway. And now they're saying that, in fact, the noises they heard 2 hours ago, which led everyone here to believe that, in fact, there may be at least one survivor from this tragedy, they believe those noises were not made by human beings in the debris. They do not know what the noises were, but they are now saying they don't think that there ever was anyone alive in the area that they were searching for the last 2 hours. So that is a sad development. People were getting optimistic or hopeful for at least some good news out of all of this, but even that small ray of hope has been dashed here within the last couple of minutes.
Dave, that really is a sad turnaround. As you know, right when we were going on the air, the reports were coming in saying that possibly it wasn't indeed true. And the reports have been varied all night long. As a matter of fact, I heard some, I'm sure you heard even more, that said that the rescuer reached in under the rubble and a victim squeezed the hand back. Are these just hopeful stories, then I would think, aren't they?
Well, according to the Oakland Police Department, those are erroneous reports, because they said they never did make physical contact with a living survivor inside the debris. Now, I am going by what the authorities here are saying formally to all the media gathered here, and they are now denying that there ever was any live victim within the last 2 hours that they had discovered.
You can see things firsthand. Is there a chance in what you see around you that there could be any survivors in the area?
Well, all along today, the mayor of Oakland has been saying there is virtually no hope that there could be a survivor at this period. Even this morning, he said there couldn't have been one. But you have to think there's 1.25 miles of debris. Now, with hundreds of people who were trapped, and most of them obviously killed, I don't think one could logically rule out the possibility that someone may be trapped alive in some sort of pocket, protected somehow from the crush of weight upon them.
So I would imagine the cleanup,
outside the realm.
The cleanup is going to be very careful, isn't it?
Yes, and they're getting underway here tonight. They're shoring up some sections to support them so that they can get the cranes into operation to start removing the heavy concrete so that they can start getting in closer to these automobiles and look for mostly victims, mostly fatal victims, but hopefully there may be a miracle yet here as the days unfold, and we're just going to have to wait and see if someone can survive this. It looks doubtful, but perhaps, you never know.
We will certainly hope for some. We're sorry it had to be a disappointing report from you, but thank you for joining us. Reporter Dave Andrews joining us live from Oakland, California. It's not just Oakland, really, but many other cities in Northern California that are feeling the pain and the anguish of the second worst earthquake to ever strike San Francisco.
In fact, almost 330 people are reported dead as of this hour, 1,400 injured, and more than 1 million people in the whole Bay Area tonight are left without power and gas, and many of them are still in the dark tonight.
As the sun came up over the San Francisco Bay Area, rescue officials got a good look at the billions of dollars of damage done in just a few seconds.
By far the worst death and destruction happened along Interstate 880 in Oakland when the upper deck of the highway collapsed onto the lower deck, instantly killing perhaps hundreds of drivers at the very height of the rush hour.
Across the bay in downtown San Francisco, the city's Marina District suffered extensive damage. Last night's big blaze had been put out, but blocks of buildings lay in ruin, having collapsed in the quake and will now have to be torn down. Rescue workers used specially trained dogs to search for any survivors in this rubble.
We're painting on the second floor, and everything just started shaking, and it's a plaster and lath building, and just whole sheets of plaster were coming off the ceiling and the walls.
It was scary. I've lived here my whole life, and this is the worst one I've ever felt.
The Bay Bridge remained closed, a big gaping hole in the top deck, after a 30-foot section of road collapsed. Engineers are trying to figure out how fast they can repair it, and if there is any structural damage to the bridge.
A number of commuters ignored pleas to stay home and packed subway trains headed to downtown San Francisco, trying to restore a sense of order to their lives.
Outside of San Francisco and Oakland, the closest community to the quake's epicenter was Santa Cruz, about 75 miles south of San Francisco. And there, damage is estimated at $350 million. Dozens of buildings collapsed, as did 2 bridges. Amazingly, no one died.
President Bush went to the headquarters of the Federal Emergency Management Agency, which is handling the government's relief effort. The president has already declared 7 Bay Area counties disaster areas. And he sent Vice President Dan Quayle and Transportation Secretary Samuel Skinner to the Bay Area to assess the damage.
The Red Cross has set up more than 30 shelters in the Bay Area, and it has gotten offers of help from around the world, including calls from earthquake survivors in Soviet Armenia.
By the way, as for the man driving the car that fell through that hole on the bridge, he was killed instantly. After going all out to help the victims of Hurricane Hugo, the Red Cross really needs your help now to help the people in the Bay Area.
The Red Cross really needs money the most and is asking that you call your contributions into their toll-free telephone number. It is 1-800-453-9000. Once again, 1-800-453-9000. Now, if you can't copy it down right now, we will show it again in just a few minutes.
Hundreds of airline passengers are stranded tonight as flights in and out of San Francisco are being canceled or diverted because of the earthquake, of course. Even though the airport was reopened for outbound flights, it's on a limited schedule right now. Travelers trying to get home lined up, trying to reroute through any city they could. In Chicago, more than 800 travelers were stranded at O'Hare Airport. The cancellations even affected travelers as far away as Japan. The airline cancellations have affected many Clevelanders trying to get back home. Elaine Tack spent the evening at Hopkins Airport. She has more now from the newsroom on how Clevelanders are making their way back to the city. Elaine?
Well, Ted, in fact, United canceled its 10 o'clock flight into Cleveland from San Francisco, leaving even more Clevelanders without a way home. The only direct flight from San Francisco to Cleveland came in early this evening, and people on that flight waited more than 6 hours to secure a seat. Everyone I spoke with is very happy to be home.
You seem more concerned over where state earthquake relief money will go than where it will come from in the first place. Floor votes on various legislation could come later today. The members in Sacramento are eyeing what projects to fund. Yesterday, they barely debated the proposed source of the money, a quarter-cent temporary hike in the sales tax. Meanwhile, Bay Area residents are going to extreme lengths to pick up the pieces of the devastating quake. Greg Lefebvre explains.
This trash holds treasure from homes leveled by last month's earthquake.
We're finding lots of pictures, jewelry, money, wallets, people's memories.
A diamond ring. Some homeowners could pull belongings from their homes in the Marina District before collapse. For those whose homes were too far gone, now is the second chance. 7 days a week, workers at the Zanker landfill picked through 40 tons of what was homes, furniture, and livelihoods.
We're finding power tools, hand tools, jewelry boxes, money.
Loose cash goes into a relief fund for earthquake families. Everything else is bagged, tagged, and sorted by address.
We know exactly where the loads are coming from, and we know the addresses. We're looking for people's names on the articles.
Like a pair of military dog tags.
And he will be getting that material back.
In a few weeks, all of this will be trucked back to San Francisco, and folks can claim what's theirs. The trash hauling company is donating crews for the sorting. The busy landfill site is too dangerous for residents to sort on their own. All of the trash is examined at least twice. So far, workers have pulled apart the remains of 5 buildings. Just as the personal items get a new life, so will most of the rubble.
90% of the material being brought here from the Marina District will be recycled. The tin, the copper, the aluminum, bricks, steel, concrete, dirt, and all the wood.
The wood is sold as firewood and fuel for power plants. The condition of the personal items varies. The golf clubs will not need repair. The motorcycle will. The searchers acknowledge they are poking their way into a lot of private lives, but at the same time, they are rescuing some precious memories. Greg LaFave, CNN, San Jose, California.
Wall Street closes up shop for the day and the week. We'll go to New York for the finishing numbers next in Dollars and Cents. California legislature is moving quickly to provide more money for earthquake relief. Lawmakers are working on a 1/4-cent increase in the state sales tax to raise $800 million. They're planning on voting tonight and hope to have it ready for the governor tomorrow. Meanwhile, Dan Blackburn is in Santa Cruz, where merchants are at work rebuilding their businesses.
Okay, then just rotate all the way through. You guys should be able to do with that.
This marked what many here feel is the real start of rebuilding in Santa Cruz. For the first time in 17 days, merchants in the historic Pacific Garden Mall were allowed to sign releases, pick up hard hats, and return to their shops. Many thought the wait had been too long.
The earthquake was a piece of cake. The city bureaucracy is what's putting us to death.
I think the city has been responsive, even though we'd like to have them move faster. They've been responsive, I think, to the total situation.
I know they're doing their best they can in other areas, but they've created a whole new kind of victim. I think there's earthquake victims and there's bureaucracy victims, and we certainly fall into that classification.
City officials say the earthquake left them little choice.
Unfortunately, we are still dealing with very hazardous, life-threatening kinds of situations, and until we can make sure that the street is basically safe, we just can't allow people unlimited access to it.
Cleaning up quickly became the top priority for shop owners, while news racks in the mall offered silent reminders of the day the earth shook.
For those people who cannot reopen at their former locations, city officials hope to rent tents to serve as temporary shops during the holiday shopping season. But the cost of those tents reportedly will be higher than the rental rates here in the mall before the earthquake.
Nonetheless, getting merchants back in business is considered vital to this city.
These people are going to go under if they don't have a good Christmas season. And if they go under or move their stores somewhere else, we're left with no downtown.
Marilyn Quayle, wife of the vice president, showed up to offer her support to the returning merchants, while others worried about what rebuilding may bring.
The question is which Santa Cruz will return. Will a contemporary, tacky, mall-type Santa Cruz return, or will there be effort in trying to build buildings that keep with the flavor of the old mall?
I think really soon none of us will remember what was here, though. I think the change might be good.
Meanwhile, inspectors finished checking out the city's roller coaster so that it can reopen. And this beach community slowly can resume a way of life that for so long has drawn so many to its shores. Dan Blackburn, CNN, Santa Cruz, California.
We're coming back with Dollars and Cents. How past droughts are reaping profits for the crop insurance business. First, a check of weekend weather.
Tomorrow, a nice fall day is expected for much of the nation, although...
The day after the big Northern California earthquake, the San Francisco Bay Area. The digging out continues, and so does the counting of the dead.
NBC Nightly News with Tom Brokaw.
Good evening from San Francisco. This is the Marina District neighborhood. It was the hardest hit residential area in San Francisco. It is believed that between 3 and 5 people died in that apartment house right back there. Although I must tell you, most of the damage in San Francisco has been confined to this area, which is about 4 square miles altogether. I made a helicopter tour today of the entire Bay Area, and the greatest damage was right here on the Oakland Bay Bridge and, of course, on Interstate 880. Yet, more than 272 people are believed to have died. The death toll could go over 300 before we're all through. Damage more than $1 billion. Yet tonight some good news as well. San Francisco airports are open, although congestion, we're told, is very heavy. And in the city of San Francisco and in many of the outlying communities, service is being restored. They expect to have full power in San Francisco before the end of this day. It was a devastating earthquake nonetheless, 7.0 on the Richter scale. This is the full range of its effects. It reached all the way into Nevada, as far south as Southern California. The epicenter was in the Santa Cruz area. The San Francisco Bay Area, of course, with its larger concentration of people, suffered the most. And the single greatest hit occurred on the Oakland Bay Bridge in approach to Interstate 880. A long section of that collapsed during the peak of the rush hour, and several hundred people were probably killed. NBC's George Lewis is standing by there right now. George, I know that the rescue operations continue, and it is difficult to know just how many people were killed. What are they saying now about the estimated death toll?
Right now, Tom, they have 10 confirmed dead. This was not supposed to happen. California's bridges and freeway abutments are reinforced to make them earthquake resistant, but this time it failed. Perhaps as many as 150 to 250 cars and their occupants were crushed when the top deck of the freeway collapsed onto a lower deck. It happened at the worst possible time, evening rush hour. This morning, firemen hoisted their ladders up to the structure looking for victims. Paramedics with specially trained dogs searched for signs of life and found none. Jackhammers were called in to begin the task of breaking up the rubble. It will be some time before the exact death toll is known.
The number of missing persons at this time reported to Oakland is 86.
Dan Ruby waits by the freeway. His son, one of the missing.
And I've been here since 6 this morning, so I couldn't sleep. So I figured rather than stay up and walk around like a zombie, I just come down here and see if I could do something.
Hey, Tim! Yesterday afternoon, just after the collapse, the scene was chaos. Bystanders rushed in to help rescue the victims, risking their own lives in the process.
I seen the freeway started dropping like dominoes, you know. I seen it just start dropping like layers, you know. People were panicking.
When we first went in, was cars that were on fire and smoking, dust all over the place, and people saying, "Help me, help me."
People were dead all around you. It was just too traumatic and awesome of an experience to relate to anyone right now.
The collapsed freeway section is east of the San Francisco Bay Bridge, connecting the bridge to downtown Oakland. A section of the bridge itself caved in during the quake, tossing cars and people into the bay, crushing others. This home video shows what it was like atop the bridge as the quake hit. A moment of sheer terror. Authorities say it will be at least 3 weeks before the bridge reopens, completely disrupting life for thousands of Bay Area commuters. And late this afternoon, Transportation Secretary Samuel Skinner said it would probably be a year and a half before this section of freeway is reopened. Meanwhile, state officials have promised a thorough investigation of why it collapsed. Tom?
George, I think that there are, more than 300,000 people who commute from East Oakland into the San Francisco area every day. They're going to have some means of getting to work. Are there any alternative plans at this time?
They're talking about reinforcing BART, the Bay Area Rapid Transit System, the subway that goes under the bay. Apparently, it was not heavily damaged by the quake. They're hoping to lay on extra trains throughout the day and night. They're talking about going to a 24-hour schedule, but it's still going to mean a major disruption for the people who live here.
They're going to have the San Francisco equivalent of Dunkirk with a lot of boats, perhaps, as well.
Well, they've got ferry boats now lined up to take people back and forth across the bay, hearkening back to the days before the Bay Bridge and before the BART system.
All right, thank you very much, George Lewis, tonight. In Oakland, San Francisco, of course, is the heart of the Bay Area, and this is a city that was leveled by a great earthquake and fires in 1906. This time, it came through in much better condition, but this neighborhood, it's called the Marina District, was hard hit. It is built on a floodplain hard by the Golden Gate Bridge and the Presidio, for those of you who are familiar with the San Francisco area. And these are elegant homes, many of them built more than 60 years ago. We get a report tonight on what's been going on in San Francisco from NBC's Don Oliver.
Most of San Francisco remained undamaged after the quake, but power was still out in the downtown area today. Without signals, traffic was snarled. One area of the city was hit hard, the Marina, not far from the Golden Gate Bridge. Thousands of curious poured into the neighborhood to stare at the warped and twisted buildings. And watch firemen continue to pour water on the remains of an apartment building and 2 homes.
Most of San Francisco, the hilly part, is built on solid rock. But this was once part of San Francisco Bay. It's all reclaimed land.
The quake turned it into a bowl of jello, and 4-story buildings were shook to the ground. The fires were believed to have resulted from broken natural gas lines. During the night, rescue workers looked for survivors in the damaged buildings and guarded against looters. Today, Mayor Art Agnos said the citizens of San Francisco were well behaved.
The crime was way below average. The bookings were down, the arrests were down.
Today, the grim search for bodies began. They used chainsaws to attempt to clear away the debris, but finally gave up, saying the job was too dangerous. They know that the bodies of 2 people are in this building, but firemen are reluctant to go after them.
This was a 4-story building. There's only 2 stories above the ground now. How are you going to get at them? And we can't risk sending a crew in if this is going to topple over.
Vice President Quayle toured the area by helicopter and then surveyed the marina damage from the ground. He promised quick federal assistance. Residents were warned not to enter buildings in the marina until they are judged to be safe. Some took great chances anyway in order to salvage their belongings. Everyone is concerned about a big aftershock knocking damaged buildings to the ground.
Please use the sidewalk so we can get emergency vehicles into this area.
Despite the warnings, the crowds continued to pour into the marina to see for themselves what the second worst earthquake in the nation's history had done to the city by the bay. Don Oliver, NBC News, San Francisco.
Altogether, damage was scattered over a 100-mile area of the San Francisco Bay. Santa Cruz, which is right on the Pacific Ocean, about 75 miles south of here near Monterey and Carmel, was the epicenter. And NBC's Roger O'Neill is there tonight.
The earthquake moved down Pacific Avenue in Santa Cruz with a vengeance. Most of the 60 stores in the 6-block-long Garden Mall were destroyed. 2 people were killed there.
We are in for a long-term rebuilding project in this community, both residentially and commercially. We need to hang together, and we're going to do that.
The oceanfront community may not get its electricity back for 3 days. The water supply is contaminated, and the sewers aren't working. Only a handful of stores were open today. Residents spent hours waiting in line to buy bottled water and bread. Only 1 customer at a time was served.
Fluid, hot dogs, Pepsi, 6-pack root beer, bread, chips.
Earthen dam reservoirs, though, in the mountains above the town held. It was the only good news Santa Cruz had.
I don't know if this isn't the big one. I don't know what would be left of this town if we got anything bigger than what we had.
The National Guard was activated to help police patrol the streets. County officials said damages here, where the earthquake started, would exceed $500 million. Roger O'Neill, NBC News, Santa Cruz.
California has 6 nuclear power plants altogether, none of them damaged by the earthquake. Rancho Seco, which is near Sacramento just north of here, and Diablo, just south of here, are open and doing business. The federal government is deeply involved in the emergency rescue operation going on here. President Bush has declared 7 counties in Northern California federal disaster areas. NBC's Robert Hager in Washington has been following that part of the story.
In Washington, an army of federal and private workers began organizing a huge relief effort. President Bush, who will visit the scene late this week, grabbed a phone himself at one point.
Jeff, here's the president.
How is it doing out there? What are you getting a lot of requests for emergency medical service?
Late Night Wednesday on TV5.
The latest on the San Francisco earthquake tonight.
This is ABC News Nightline. Reporting from Washington, Ted Koppel.
This is that time in the wake of a disaster when we want desperately, sometimes almost hopelessly, to believe in the possibility of miracles, in the notion that perhaps somehow someone has survived what seems to be unsurvivable. And indeed, there was just such a story this evening. Some reports earlier on this evening that someone had miraculously survived the collapse of that section of freeway leading up to the Bay Bridge in San Francisco on the Oakland side. And now we pick up, in effect, where Peter Jennings left off just half an hour ago. Every once in a while, as when Hurricane Hugo ravaged a stretch of the East Coast along the Carolinas, or when little Jessica McClure fell down that well in Texas, every once in a while, there is a story that binds us together in a spirit of national identity, that sense of there but for the grace of God go I, or one of mine. The earthquake has had that kind of impact. Indeed, it has engaged the empathy and compassion of people around the world. Mikhail Gorbachev sent a message of condolence to the White House. Similar messages have come in from the Vatican and the United Nations and capitals around the world. Strange how disasters draw us together in a way that good news rarely does. Wherever in these United States we call home, we have all been talking today about California and the earthquake. Here's Nightline correspondent Jeff Greenfield.
It's been a frightening scene here. As you can see, just below me is where this crack in the Bay Bridge occurred. A 50
I do believe that there are some deaths, but no one can tell me how many.
We're urging people to stay home, not get in their cars, or get home through back streets if they're trying to go.
What we saw was eerie and frankly frightening. People on the streets, people unfocused.
Minutes after the earthquake knocked San Francisco's TV stations off the air last night, they were back on the air, telling the story to those most affected by it.
If you're at all uncertain about what to do, if you smell gas in your immediate area, you're not sure how to turn it off, open up the phone book and look at the instructions. And they're very clear. You don't need a lot of fancy tools.
But it has also been the big, indeed the only story across the country.
Good evening. Anyone who has ever lived in San Francisco will tell you this is the nightmare you pray will never happen.
Hardest hit was San Francisco, where the quake collapsed buildings and a section of the Bay Bridge.
It's been measured as up to 7 on the Richter scale, and that makes it the strongest land-based earthquake since the 1950s.
And even on the other side of the world, TV viewers who thought they would be watching the American World Series stayed to watch the unfolding of an American tragedy. Just as shockwaves radiate hundreds of miles from the epicenter of an earthquake, so emotional shockwaves radiate thousands of miles from the site of a disaster, connecting us by ties of compassion, concern, or fear.
Dateline San Francisco, April 18th, 1906.
Back in 1906, before the days of radio or TV or easy coast-to-coast communication, it took weeks for film of the great San Francisco earthquake to make its way east. And those beyond the immediate region had to wait until the newspapers rolled to learn of the disaster.
Across the city, there was tremendous damage, fires breaking out as gas and power lines broke apart.
But today, a local news event becomes a worldwide news event instantaneously.
В 1906 году Сан-Франциско потряс толчок силой.
If you have reached anybody in the Bay Area by telephone in the past 24 hours, give me a call and tell me what they're reporting.
In newsrooms across America, editors and producers looked for the local angle.
Chronology of the worst quakes, reaction from people around here.
Or relatives or friends trapped in the earthquake.
With communications cut off, it was a long night of worrying and waiting for word from loved ones.
Stories of transcontinental rescue, as when an Oakland woman, trapped in a high-rise building, called her daughter in Virginia, who in turn called Fairfax police for help.
And we put together a teletype and sent it not only to the Oakland Police Department, but the Alameda Police Department as well, advising them of the lady's plight. As a result, the lady was rescued along with 2 other people in the building and is safe and well.
For answers to the question, could it happen here?
There's no question that a quake of this size in this town would be a lot worse.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, also I mean, we put that quake in New York and we've got 10 times the...
Well, of course, the Chicago area is not immune to an earthquake, as we all know, though other natural disasters, such as floods and tornadoes, are more likely in the Midwest.
Memphis, Tennessee. Few of the buildings here are earthquake resistant, and that concerns people who live and work in downtown buildings.
For advice, what to do if you face a disaster.
Eyewitness News is offering a free earthquake survival guide. This guide includes information on how to prepare yourself and your family if the big quake should hit here.
Worries over the local fallout from the San Francisco earthquake, as in this report from Charleston, South Carolina, recently hit by Hurricane Hugo.
The California tragedy has put an unexpected burden on federal resources that we need in the Lowcountry.
It is as if the astonishing capacity of mass media to wipe out barriers of distance also wipes out a sense of protection.
Look at this. Oh my gosh.
And as if we might have been driving down that highway that fell in upon hundreds. As if we are living in a community where, literally, the roof has fallen in. In times past, people would look at a distant disaster and declare, "There, but for the grace of God, go I." In these times, God's grace is not enough to shield us from the sense that we are all living through days and nights when the earth falls from beneath our feet. Jeff Greenfield for Nightline in New York.
And when we come back, we'll go live to locations in the San Francisco Bay Area and elsewhere in Northern California that were especially hard hit by the quake.
This is ABC News Nightline.
This is Channel 3 News.
This home video shows the terror of the quake that is still shaking the San Francisco area today. A bridge collapsing beneath a driver. That driver lived, but near Oakland, they've almost given up hope of finding anyone else alive in the rubble of Interstate 880.
The quake was the second deadliest in U.S. history, killing more than 270 people and injuring almost 700. Police, fire, and utility workers are going around the clock, and hundreds of Army and National Guard troops are on active duty to provide medical and other support to the battered Bay Area. Insurance companies expect more than $1 billion in earthquake damage claims. Good evening, everybody. I'm Leon Bibb.
And I'm Jill Beach. President Bush signed a disaster declaration for the demolished quake area. He says he will tour the blasted Bay region when he's sure that he will be out of the way of rescue workers. Here is a wrap-up of what the president will see.
More than 250 people were killed when the upper deck of Interstate 880 entombed hundreds of commuters driving on the lower deck. One man whose car was crushed to just 18 inches was pulled from the carnage alive. A truck driver said waves of asphalt shot up over his windshield. Paramedics searched furiously for survivors.
Horrible, horrible ways of dying. It's just awful.
You think it was a sudden death situation?
Some of them definitely, yes. Some of them definitely, yes.
Rescue workers tunneling through the collapsed wreckage of the highway have given up hope of finding anyone else alive. Some died as rescuers watched, helpless to free victims trapped in pulverized concrete and fire. The mile-long highway collapse is near Oakland. To the north and west, at the bridge linking Oakland and San Francisco, the killer quake again wreaked havoc. A 30-foot section of the bridge's upper level collapsed on the lower deck. Amazingly, no one was killed.
Luckily enough, all the cars were coming into San Francisco for the ball game, so it was very light traffic going into Oakland. And I was about a mile from the anchorage. And I said, wait a minute, this can't be. And for 45 seconds, the bridge started oscillating and throwing cars, tossing them.
The tremors touching off the devastation started at 5:04 Pacific time last night, just as Game 3 of the World Series was about to get underway. Over 60,000 people jammed roadways after being ordered out of Candlestick Park. The quake split parts of the stadium open. It is being combed now for structural damage.
Just missed.
What?
Yeah, just missed. It really came down hard. Yeah, we're on the top deck. It really shook.
On the northern tip of San Francisco, a fire raged out of control in the residential Marina district, fed by natural gas leaks. 3 people were victims of the flames. Bricks and rubble rained down on people in the city, killing 5. Buildings were pancaked.
It took 5 blocks of hoses. The neighbors helped carry those hoses from the ocean to the fire 5 blocks away and connect them because there weren't enough firefighters to do that initially.
60 miles to the south, near the earthquake's epicenter, more grim scenes of death and destruction. Rescuers fear more bodies are entombed in massive piles of glass and brick left in the wake of the powerful tremors. Vice President Quayle arrived in San Francisco this afternoon to survey the quake's destruction. President Bush, who has been under fire for slow response to Hurricane Hugo's fury and the Exxon Valdez oil spill, cleared way for hundreds of millions of dollars in federal aid within 12 hours of the disaster.
25, more or less, federal agencies coordinating their work to try to help in this disaster.
In the meantime, Californians struggle with widespread power outages, crippled transportation, and snarled, overloaded communications lines. The quake, measuring a 6.9 on the Richter scale, was a deadly second in strength to the 1906 San Francisco earthquake, when over 2,500 people were killed.
Power is now restored to over 2/3 of San Francisco.
There are hundreds of Clevelanders either in the Bay Area of California or who have relatives there, and the last 26 hours have been a frantic time for most of them. Channel 3's Tom Sweeney reports on people trying to find relatives across the continent.
Mita Goodman spent a sleepless night. She dialed her brother Mark's number in Aptos, California countless times.
We're sorry. All circuits are now busy.
Mark called her at about 4:30 this morning. He's all right, but can't find his 2 children, 26-year-old Susie and 29-year-old Larry. They live near the epicenter of the quake.
I haven't heard from the kids. He said, I can't get through. And I don't know how bad it is. So I have no idea what happened with them. We haven't heard a word.
Alice Pilarczyk flew to San Francisco on Ameritrust business and told Del Donahue she got there 10 minutes before the quake struck.
We were trying to get a rental car, and all the walls started shaking and things came down from the ceiling, and it was just total chaos. People started running for the doors.
Kathy Durkee was up all night, close to tears.
I was certain that something was wrong. You know, I thought for sure. You know, I couldn't get through, and I called, and yes.
Are you close?
Very. Her and I.
At 5 a.m., her sister Pat Roscoe's called from Los Gatos. And Barbara Aremland, an associate professor at CSU, saw these pictures and knew her sister Claire lived on Divisadero in San Francisco.
I cried because I said Divisadero, it looks like her building. All the buildings look very similar. And that's when I started to feel the helplessness.
The fire was 2 blocks north, but Claire summed it up this way.
You know, some people were lucky, some were not.
Claire is safe but homeless. Others were not so lucky. Tom Sweeney, Channel 3 News.
San Francisco telephone company officials are asking that you don't call that area until tomorrow. The system is overloaded.
U.S. Air Flight 116 came into Cleveland Hopkins Airport from San Francisco late this afternoon.
Here's my ticket from Candlestick, Game 3. On sale.
Came down. Jim Cleveland and business associates from Hudson had been at Candlestick for the World Series when it hit.
I was real frightened then.
Being in an airplane and hitting turbulence, when you sit there and bounce around and you can't stand in the aisles, it was really a lot like that.
Then suddenly it felt like a big giant ape had grasped the stadium and was twisting it. So you were moving 3 or 4 feet on either side.
Karen Cooper of Lakewood did not learn until 2:30 this morning that her husband Doug was okay. He was staying at the Hyatt Hotel.
I was just getting out of the shower at the time it hit, so
I stood in the door jamb like a good soldier, you know, and then ran around trying to get some clothes on. I figured if this thing's coming down in a pile of rubble, I am not going to go down naked. I want some clothes on.
Sarah Bale was at that hotel too. Everyone was told to leave, that the hotel might come down.
Well, I suppose it makes you think about what's important in life. I was worried about my luggage until they said that, so I don't know where it is now.
Later, Mrs. Bale may be concerned about her luggage. This evening, she and the others are just relieved to have come through the earthquake unhurt. Joe?
And there were San Francisco residents stranded in Cleveland trying to get home. That part of the story from Channel 3's Joe Mossbrook at Hopkins Airport.
They've been waiting all night to get a flight to San Francisco to get home and assess their damage.
Got through to Detroit to my in-laws, and they had already heard from California that our apartment was, the fellow that's watching said it was a shambles.
Teresa Heron lives in the Marina section of San Francisco.
What did you hear about your
I
home?
found out that my home's okay and my husband's okay.
But she's an artist and afraid 3 years' worth of paintings may be gone.
What have you heard about your home?
Nothing yet. But it's 400 feet from the San Andreas Fault, so in Woodside, so just keeping my fingers crossed.
They boarded quickly when the pilot said the San Francisco airport had reopened.
The biggest problem for these travelers is the uncertainty, not knowing what they'll find when they get to their homes in San Francisco. Joe Mossbrook, Channel 3 News at Cleveland Hopkins Airport.
The San Francisco airport closed last night, reopened for flights early this morning. Leon?
With San Francisco authorities telling people not to call the already overloaded telephone system, but you can use the Red Cross to make connections. Red Cross volunteers are trying to coordinate help for Hurricane Hugo and Hurricane Jerry victims. They're also collecting names of people with loved ones in the California Bay Area. If you want information or can make a donation or be a medical volunteer, you can call this number, 781-1800, not the National Red Cross telephone number. By the way, the Cleveland Red Cross says it is accepting only money donations for the quake victims, not food or clothing donations.